200 years ago, when the bombs fell all over America, only the most unremarkable and boring areas weren't targeted. And this is how our city was formed. While at first being a small village on the coast of the upper Colorado River, it grew quite quickly as remnants from the US Air Force were accepted to join it. Together with them, the town survived the nuclear winters and raiders to such an extent that some form of democracy through the town council could be restored. And even though our town might seem uninteresting from the outside, the USF remnants have brought with them the power of flight, with us being one of the only towns in the wasteland capable of constructing and flying our own aircrafts. However, unlike the US Air Force before the war, we decided to put all our efforts on airships and blimps instead, since they are far more self-sufficient and have no need for the big amount of infrastructure that airplanes need. This uniqueness in the wasteland has brought us a long period of trade and neutrality, as none of our neighbors dare to strike us. But times are changing. Not so far south, on the other side of the Colorado River, a cruel tyrant has conquered himself large swaths of land with no plans of stopping. And we never know when our neighbors still decide to attack us. So with changing times, people are starting to demand reforms. While some want the town council to become more democratic and some others seeking to turn it into a council of elite, there is one group who seeks to fully dismantle it and replace it with an effective leader. And the leader in question is the Air Marshal, who has formed a cult of personality around striking first and uniting Colorado. With his popularity only rising and most of the army already behind him, it was eventually decided that the council would be dissolved and he proclaimed as leader. His first action now in power was to launch the project our town has been working on for so long, the first aerial merchant fleet. We will send this fleet all across the wasteland to buy and sell everything from guns to machinery, all to make a profit to fund our town. To help our merchants and to provide us with extra passive cap income, we will also establish branch offices in every major trade node in order to have a permanent footing in the areas. The first office we set up was in our very own Utah over the Uintah mountains in the Mormon town of New Canaan. With it already being a great success, we continued further north and set up another office in another religious land, the Heaven's Gate. But to fuel this growing operation, we are in need of more airships, something our Air Marshal is already on his way to fix, by using our gained money to construct a new blimp workshop and better infrastructure. And with expanded infrastructure and industry, it is natural that a city grows, especially as our growing trade is attracting merchants to our city as well. And a growing city means a bigger food consumption. Fortunately, we do have some arable land in the south, which we will start exploiting. And even though some fish in the Colorado River have 2 heads, this just means more fish per fish. However, our marshal hasn't forgotten about his military objective, and while a big part of the population doesn't support his militarization, as our office in the steam was established, news arrived that would change everyone to his side. Airship piracy. As the news spread about our riches, raiders are starting to shoot down or hijack our airships, killing our merchants and stealing our money. So with the people's support, we've started reviewing our incredibly ineffective military in order to find solutions. The simplest solution which will fix the hijacking once our ships land is to hire mercenaries. Most of our population aren't warriors, but we can sure as hell trust that mercenaries are, especially if we pay them well. However, to stop the raiders from shooting down our blimps, we will need to militarize them. So far, their design has been mostly focused on trading, so it will take time to change it, but it is necessary and will help us in future wars as well. First of all, the design will be redrawn with thicker exterior, making the blimp harder to shoot down. But before we add arms to it to end the pirates once and for all, our Air Marshal used the opportunity of an angry population to stoke militarism and import much needed weaponry. Some of these weapons went up on our airships to fully militarize them. So the next time any raiders tried shooting down our blimps, it was instead they who got shot down. This means that piracy has been destroyed and we are once again ready to expand our operations. Firstly, an office will be set up in Colorado, both to make money and to scout the area for our future conquest plans. Then we continued to the west instead, establishing trade with the Californian Republic, the land of consumers. With the now even bigger influx of money, the Air Marshal has decided that it's time to prepare for our first expansions. Because even though plans are starting to be drawn up about rebuilding Eagle Rock to accommodate all new traders and people, our territory is currently too small. To prepare for our first ever war, he has announced the formation of an actual army as opposed to our current militia. And to help our conscripts also prepare, we will use our money to construct a training facility. This allowed us to raise 2 new infantry regiments, however we can't simply win with infantry. We must use our new military airships, and while we already have about 40 at our disposals, we've decided to use 20 of our commercial blimps as well, which does cost us some money. And so we are ready for our first conquest. The target is the Uintah tribe with their quite large territory. Immediately after we declared war, we exploited an unguarded part of our border to move around some of their forces. After consolidating our positions, we started counterattacking their counterattack, allowing us to capture the port outside of 9 Mile Ranch. However, instead of trying to capture the small village, we shifted our efforts to the west and their capital, which we could enter after a short battle. During all these battles, our blimps had played an important role, however they have still been able to shoot down 11 of our 60 airships. So stronger and better designs are a must in the future. Returning to the front, we started a battle to try and encircle 3 of the regiments, but instead of trying to retreat, they started attacking us in the east instead. While they won the battle, it was too late since we've already cut the 3 units off, and since their attack had left 9 Mile Ranch weak, we used the opportunity to capture the city as well. After destroying the encircled city, all our forces started heading south to their last settlement, East Carbon. Now since the front is quite narrow here, they had a clear defensive advantage, but with our blimps and superior forces, the small village was eventually captured and their leaders surrendered. We will immediately start coring their lands, which won't be a big problem because even though they didn't have any aircrafts, their population are surprisingly interested in it, so they will fit right in with us. During the war, you might think that trade went down, however it was the opposite. Because with the war, merchants selling weapons started showing up in Eagle Rock in far greater numbers, turning the city into a trade node. And in order to accommodate the rapidly growing population, our marshal launched the project of planning and constructing a better city. First, several high-rises were built, but we soon faced a lack of resources. So we started an initiative to get more resources from our own lands. But that was all we had time for before the end of the war. And with it over, we will once again focus on setting up new branch offices. Continuing in our south, more specifically in Arizona, Nevada and Texas. Since it takes quite a long time to set them all up, we spent our free time to prepare for new airship designs and improve the strength of our army. We did this by buying the know-how of dynamite production, then starting to produce it with newly constructed military workshops. Finally, we equipped our infantry with the dynamite as well as medicine which we have bought from merchants. But we didn't stop there, since we decided to train our army even more to raise their effectiveness. This also included training our aircrew. Looking back to our branch offices, all 3 have been set up, and with all these offices, some of our merchants are starting to find rather special things on sale. For example, a Garden of Eden creation kit. However, most of these are costly, and while we have the money, it is best that we save it right now, because we are preparing for the next conflict. And this time we plan to fight against 2 nations, the Dryblowers and Ouroboros, who have been locked in a stalemate the last year. However, both are stronger than us, and while better blimps are out of the question, since despite more focus on advanced aerodynamics research, it will take far too long, we do have one thing up our sleeves: money. And money means mercenaries. So in addition of training 6 new infantry regiments, we hired Lieutenant Durand, leading a group of Brotherhood offshoots. After most of the 6 infantry regiments were deployed, we declared war on both our enemies. Since we must cross a river to fight any of them, we focused on the weaker, the Dryblowers. Even though we were skeptical about crossing the river, we eventually managed to, and the village of Rock Springs was captured. As the news of the event reached the Dryblower capital, they decided to surrender, something which we weren't ready for. And so a scramble for their territory started. We tried our best to reach the deep mines before Ouroboros' forces, but sadly failed. Fortunately though, we managed to stop their first offensive against us. As they definitely are stronger than us, we decided to hire another mercenary group. This time Desert Rangers. But this was kept secret as we planned a big offensive in the most southern south of our front. Even though we had a hard time breaking over the river, the fact that we had far superior numbers as well as no enemy reinforcements arriving meant that we could slowly wear out their forces until they were forced to surrender. Once on the other side of the river, we spread out our forces in all directions with our Desert Rangers rapidly moving towards their capital. Some days later, Ouroboros, their capital, was entered and Moab units were also destroyed. The news of our breakthrough had eventually started to reach the Ouroboros units in the north, who had now started to reinforce the front. But they were not enough, as we too had sent our own reinforcement of our power armor unit, and together with them Storm Creek as well as their last cord city of Burham Springs was captured. And so their capitulation followed. Now begins the process to core all these lands. Fortunately, most of the Uintah land has already been cored, however with all this new land it will take us a long time. While we wait, we can look back on the development of Eagle Rock. It had actually progressed quite far, because with architectural geniuses arriving from around the wasteland we could construct skyscrapers housing both inhabitants as well as factories. The last thing we did was to construct a massive university to attract even more bright minds of the wastelands. Another thing we did during the war was to open our final branch office in the south, in Mexico. And now that the war is over, we can continue our economic expansions, setting up offices in Dakota, Colombia and lastly Manitoba. While we wait for them all to be set up, we will prepare for our next war, against the Diana AI who has fled from Lanius to our north. Fortunately, there isn't much to prepare, since our army is already quite strong and our better airship design is being worked on. But we still held war games and prepared the creation of our own special forces not dependent on the Desert Ranger mercenaries. In addition to this, we hired our third mercenary group, Operator Ross and his Wasteland Tank Division. With Diana currently at war with Vault 27, we decided to seize the opportunity and declare war on both. Even though this was our longest war yet, during which we ran out of manpower, we've come out on top and defeated both our enemies. Just as usual, we will begin to pacify and core our new lands. However, since we aren't fully done with Ouroboros and Dryblower integration, it will take a long time. And unfortunately, time isn't something we have plenty of, because we have reached our biggest challenge yet. Taking over Dog City or Denver. The city, which currently is under control of Caesar's Legion, may be the strongest out of all wasteland armies. Luckily, however, we aren't alone in the fight. The just as massive new Californian Republic is at war with them, meaning that Caesar will have to fight a two-front war. And we also have a secret weapon. With our merchants all over Western America, we have found a group of former enclavists offering to sell vertibird schematics, a form of helicopter far exceeding our own combat blimps. While costing 270 days worth of income, it will be well worth it. Still, it could take 2 years to start producing them, time which, as I said, we don't have. So after having cored enough territory to have a positive amount of manpower, we decided to jump into the war with Caesar and his Iron Alliance ally. We immediately tried to advance before too many of their forces had arrived. While everything started great, we were too slow and Caesar had soon more forces on the front than we had. However, despite having failed, we have at least inflicted more casualties on him than he has on us. So the only issue is that we don't have enough forces. To fix this, we have expanded our conscription with plans to further expand it even more in the future. We also continued the coring process and used our money to attract people to our country, both morally and immorally. During our long wait for extra divisions to be trained, Caesar started attacking us several times. Fortunately, all of them were rebuffed and we could even inflict extra casualties on their forces. After several of these attacks, totaling up to 10,000 casualties for our enemies, we decided to try our own offensive. It consisted of first retreating to lure them to attack us, then once they did we reinforced our front line and started a counterattack. While it looked promising at first, they had so many divisions we could never quite break through and were eventually forced to give up our offensive. Even though our first vertibirds had entered production and were attacking enemy forces as well as infrastructure. And even worse news had arrived from California, where shady sands had fallen and Caesar's legion is sweeping through the country. Additionally, even though the Rio Pact has joined the fight, they are already having trouble. So maybe the only way we can advance in this war is to open a larger front, which is precisely why we have been training a second infantry army. Together with them, our mercenaries and spec ops infantry invaded the Luminous ones, which was far easier than attacking Caesar. After only a few days, the capital was captured and their country divided in two. We could then safely capitulate them. We continued with the Baggers, where we used the same strategy of cutting their country in two. This time we cleared the north first. Then we turned to the south, where one province will be opened once we defeat them. However, we reached it before they were defeated and luckily it was undefended, so we could cross the river, and despite some small resistance from Caesar, we entered our first strategic settlement, Fort Morgan. Some days later, the Baggers would surrender as well. But all is not well, because we are now the only nation left at war with Caesar, who has defeated the NCR and the Rio Pact. In addition, he has an air force which is rivaling our own. But worst of all is that Caesar has naval invaded us in the west. We were able to react quickly after discovering it by deploying 10 reserve infantry divisions and sending over all our special forces. Together they could claw back our territory by encircling the most forward positioned Caesar units, and while it all seemed to be under control, we never quite managed to capture Dinosaur Caverns and its important port. This allowed Caesar to pump in divisions rapidly, overwhelming our forces to the point that we had to send over a third of our eastern forces to this front as well. A second naval invasion would soon follow in Storm Creek, but fortunately it was a small one, and we could take back the port after a while. However, in the process everything started collapsing. The legionaries are violently advancing in Burham Springs. Eagle Rock has been left completely open, we've run out of manpower, and worst of all is that they might be breaking through in the east. We tried to save our capital by mobilizing the police force, and while they could hold the city at first, Caesar's ally naval invaded behind the city to fully encircle it. Meanwhile, in the east we had to sacrifice our position in Fort Morgan in order to hold them off. Luckily this was enough for now at least. Back to the east, we have taken the painful decision of abandoning it and retreating to former Diana territory. Hopefully it will allow us to defend better. At the same time, the Eagle Rock defenses fell apart and the legions entered our proud city. While we thought this would be the end of the attacks, Caesar believed otherwise and continued breaking through our defensive lines. With no more reserve manpower and war support slowly approaching zero, there was not much we could do to stop them. So after a while they had captured all of Craig. But after this the attacks stopped. We've managed to change a losing battle into one of eternal stalemate. However, war support continued falling, and with our once proud air force destroyed as well as our capital out of reach forever, people are mad. Even the elites and the military have turned against the air marshal. So as a crowd of people started demanding his resignation and the reintroduction of the People's Council, there was nothing stopping them from getting their demands through. The first thing the newly formed council did was to ask for a peace deal with Caesar. While we refused at first, with us retreating into the mountains surrounding Vault 27 and the penitentiary, he realized that he would never defeat us and agreed to our offer. So we are now left with an easily defendable area perfect for the council's new foreign policy, isolationism. While expanding worked for a while, in the end it was it which lost our capital. So we will now simply bunker up and turn us into the Switzerland of the wastelands. Thanks for watching, and thanks a lot for last year. If things go as great, we will have reached 100,000 subscribers before the end of 2024. Anyways, see you in the next video.